Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
This episode is brought to you by Founder Catalyst. If you're raising funds and you need to get yourself SCIS and EIS Advanced Assurance and you need some help with that, then stick around to find out how you can get 5% off of Founder Catalyst's services.
Okay, we're back for part 2. I'm here with Olivier. If you haven't checked out part 1, check it out, because in that, Olivier explains who he is and why he's on my show and why I'm interested in talking to him, a bit about his background, the startup he's working on, etc. One of the things I said I wanted to chat about you in part 2 was to get kind of your position on what's going on in the world of dev tech, which is where your startup, your open source product currently is focused on. So, look, there's a lot of noise that I'm hearing from the developers I know, the tech teams I know, and so on. It seems almost every day there's some big announcement of some huge innovation within this space as it pertains specifically to AI. There's a lot of concern as well, it seems, especially from the angle of sort of junior developers being replaced. I know of a couple of companies that just outright are no longer hiring junior developers because the tools available just mean that it isn't a requirement. And because of that, there's kind of a knock-on effect that's concerned that's going to happen, which means there are going to be less and less jobs for junior developers, which means how can people become senior and so on. So I know I've thrown quite a lot at you there, but like, what are your general thoughts on this whole topic, and what are your observations?
Yeah, that's a very interesting area of discussion. I want to touch on the first point you mentioned. I think the pace of innovation is kind of crazy. It's really hard to keep up with all the new tools, all the new technologies that are kind of developed. And the shift that I've seen, and I kind of had to deal with myself, is if you go back a few years ago and you were leading a development team. I would talk more specifically about data, but I think it can be generalized to any kind of development teams. So a few years ago, when you had a specific challenge or a specific problem that you wanted to answer within a company, and you were leading that team, a normal route would be to ask the team to develop whatever software component you needed to have. These days, at least on the data side, typically I would not advise on doing that unless this is very, very specific to your company or very specific to your industry. And the reason being is that we in the data world, we have what we call big data platforms like Snowflake, Databricks, Fabric, BigQuery. So those are all supported by big tech companies, and the rate at which they're producing new feature and new software component is so fast that they are most likely to produce whatever you need before you have the chance of developing it yourself. So you're going to be developing it for weeks or months, depending on how big the scope of the project is, and then you're going to realize that before you're actually able to release it, or just after, that company will come up with something very similar that's going to do exactly the same thing, and you might already be a customer of that software company, and you just have to use it. So we've kind of shifted from developing software and developing algorithm to making sure that we drive value out of the data that we have. So a few years ago, the focus was really about building something and making sure that it was essentially about the mechanics and making sure that we can process the data, that we can transform it, do it efficiently, adopt best practices. But these days, like developing that internally in your company, like I said, it has to be very specific, a need that is very specific to your company, because otherwise you might as well wait for that feature to be available from these big companies. So it kind of shifted the focus from building and developing to really generating value out of your data. So what's the key differentiator of your business? How does it, generate value from the data that you have? That's really the focus that should be on every data leader today, more than being about the technology. And I think everything that has been done on the AI side for the last few months is just an amplificator of that. Because like you were saying, these LLM can help you code. They can, I'm going to touch base on replacing you in a few minutes. But they're definitely there to help and to speed up the process. So the way to differentiate yourself and to really be useful for your company is to understand, what are you trying to achieve as a company? What kind of insight are you trying to provide to your stakeholder, and really focus on that more than on the technology itself. So yes, I mean, AI has really changed the game. It's we don't develop the same way as we did before, because these tools really help in speeding up the process. But from what I've seen, at least today, might be different in 6 or 12 months. But today, you still need to understand what you're doing to be able to use those tools, at least to code. Uh, because yes, they're very good at coding, but they're not very good at coding a big problem. So let's say that you have let's say we go back to our example of episode 1, where you want to build your financial report for the year, and you have receipts that are lying around, you have some spreadsheet, you have some emails. So if you ask an LLM to come up with your financial statement, I don't think it's going to do a great job of it, because you're not specific enough. If you're able to break it down into smaller components and say, those are my expenses, those are my income, I have paid these taxes, I've made this and this, and you essentially tackle these problems one by one and be very specific about what you want, then the LLM is going to be able to tackle these problems one by one, and it's going to do a great job of it. And then you can essentially ask it to combine everything back into a single consolidated solution, and you're going to have what you were looking for in the first place. So it can do the job, but you still need to understand what you're doing to be able to tell it how to do it. And that's kind of how I see interaction between LM and coding today. Is you still need to understand what you're trying to achieve, and to some extent how to get there. So if you're an experienced developer, and you're trying to build something that you might have built before, but you're trying to use a new technology or a new package that you've never used before, LLM is going to be super useful, because it kind of knows how the mechanics work of that specific technology, but it's still going to require input on what you're expecting in terms of end result, or what kind of strategy you need to put in place to use that tool or to use that technology. So if you're completely junior, if you've never had experience building something similar, it's going to be really hard for you to ask an LLM to essentially do your job, because you're not going to be able to ask the right question or to guide the AI into building what you're expecting. It can do it, but it needs guidance, and it needs to understand the path to get there. So because of that, I think senior developer role will evolve, because it's not so much like I was saying about building and exploring technology is more about understanding what's the key differentiator of your business, what exactly you need to produce to generate value for your stakeholder, and you're going to be able to use LLM to build your product more efficiently. That has to happen. And I think for juniors, I can see why it's kind of intimidating. But I mean, I think there's still ways of getting around that. And I think one of the key thing is to learn how LLM works and how to leverage them as much as possible. Because if you're able to do that, you're kind of positioning yourself as someone very flexible and someone that can do what you're kind of expected to do, but also interact with the AI ecosphere. And I think that adds a lot of value to your profile, because it's not true today that all senior dev will use super efficiently AI. So if you're a junior developer, you have less experience, but you can actually not necessarily master, but use AI to your best advantage. I think it's going to be promoting yourself as a candidate, and it helps you land jobs. So I think there's a way of going around that, but for sure it's going to change the landscape, and it's going to change how essentially what people are expected to do compared to today, where you're kind of expected to build something, to code. I think in the next few months, it's going to be more about understanding why you're doing it than how you need to build it. Because if you understand why, then you can leverage the LLM for the how and for the all the mechanics. But the key is really the why and what kind of value it brings to your company.
And that's where the conversation always comes back to, doesn't it? When we have this conversation about AI replacing people in any industry, the conversation seems to always come back to this idea of, well, first, it's not going to happen very quickly if it happens at all. But second, the immediate advantage is to those that embrace it as early as possible. And those that do will potentially have a distinct advantage over those that don't, and those that are maybe sort of a bit more set in their ways, right? Unprepared to move with the times, which is always the case with any new technological innovation. For those that don't adopt it quickly, they get left behind, and nothing's truer here. It's just, I think it's just what's astounding about it right now is it's happening on so many fronts, so many industries, so many positions. That's what's just so incredible about it. Whereas normally a tech innovation sort of starts in one very particular lane and takes a long time before it starts touching other people. What you were saying as well about sort of that there is still a level of technical competency that's required in order to really take advantage of these tools, and that's entirely right. I mean, in the same way that I often talk to founders, the founders that I work with, when they have never, if they're non-technical founders and they've never worked with a dev team before, there's a poor expectation that essentially that they're going to be able to speak the same language. Like there is a language barrier between technical and non-technical people. Sometimes literally as well, just to make it even more complicated, right? But there is, and you'll probably know this better than anyone, being in the position you're in. But non-technical people have a way of explaining things that doesn't always make sense to technical people, and technical people interpret that in a specific way, go off and build what they've been asked to build, and then they get shouted at when it's not what they were asked to do, and that everyone gets frustrated, and that happens all the time. And so I use that example because that's kind of what it feels like at the moment. Again, non-technical people, they have expectations from AI, and it's not being met a lot of the time, and they think there's something wrong with the technology, and it's not. It's just that.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
It's at a point in time right now where it understands a very specific language or set of languages, and you have to meet it halfway. It can understand some of what you're saying, but you need to meet it halfway with at least some base knowledge to get the most out of it, right?
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And I think that concept apply way beyond data or or even
Right.
software development. When
Yeah.
I was in the simulation industry, um, I would say one of the key differentiator for someone technical to be able to grow his career and get promoted was his ability to adapt his language to the audience.
Right.
That was the biggest differentiator, because you can be very technical, you can be an absolute expert in your domain. If you're not able to explain it to someone that don't have the same level of knowledge, you're not going to go anywhere, because it's going to be really hard to promote what you're doing, to explain what you're doing, and especially to for other people to understand the value of what you're doing. So I think that has always been a key aspect to the development of a career, but I think it's going to be even more important with LLM and AI, because you need to be able to explain to non-technical people what are the limitations of a given system, what are the benefit, and where it's going to lead you in the future. So I think and I think soft skills are going to be even more important in the future than they are today. Like even
I
today,
agree.
you have different level of technical position, from junior to senior. Eventually, you get into a staff position or even a principal position. And I would say the difference between, let's say, like if you want to go beyond senior, it's all about your soft skills. It's not about your technical skills anymore. It's about your ability to promote the work that you're doing, to explain the work that you're doing, to lead a team. And I think today that kind of barrier, that kind of shift really happens between senior and staff. But I think tomorrow, in a year, we're going to see that barrier happening at a lower level, because AI can handle more of the purely technical work. I think to be able to differentiate yourself as a developer, you're going to be able to have more soft skills and be able to explain your work, and to essentially lead by example, and to influence people more than you would have to do it today, because the purely technical work is going to be handled by some kind of AI system.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that applies, like we said, to a lot of different industries too, in a similar way. That because of essentially, if you're removing the humanity out of some elements of something, then by definition or by default, other areas needs to increase humanity to make up for it. Because otherwise, as human beings, we feel uncomfortable, and that's just a thing. The other thing you mentioned in your answer to my question before as well was really interesting too, in terms of sort of the um, businesses' approach to data as a whole. Because this is something that I have a huge amount of conversations internally with my company about. As what we do is we take skills data and essentially make it AI ready, and we talk a lot about really just how fundamentally misunderstood data is in companies by most companies. That there's, again, there's this misconception that AI can come in, like your example about expenses, and somehow understand what all these different pieces of paper mean, that that it can differentiate from all the different font types and sizes and shades of the ink print. There's so many variables and for some reason there is, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but this mainstream belief that there's a bit of magic in AI, at least as it stands, to be able to look through all of these different data sets within a company. Like you said, sometimes huge data sets, but on a huge amount of different platforms, annotated and tagged in a variety of different ways, and somehow it will just work. And that's quite a frustrating thing, even from my perspective, again, as someone who isn't necessarily that technical, but working with people that are, and trying to work with businesses to get them more prepared for how they could use AI agents, for example, within their organization and things like that. It's increasingly frustrating to see. I think there is some realization now happening, but it's slow. I would also say that I think part of this issue is because we've become such tech stack heavy organizations. It means that we've kind of created this problem for ourselves. We've got organizations now that are using such an enormous array of technologies in order to capture data, that the problem is it's siloed. in a variety of different ways, stored in a variety of different ways, etc. That now suddenly there's this desperate scramble. Like we need, like you said, you need to get this one sort of source of truth, and the realization has suddenly dawned on people, like, oh shit, we've spent the last 8 years gathering this data in the most inefficient way. We've not been tagging it or doing things with it in a way that is in any way useful. And so now if we want to do any of this stuff that our competitors are doing, it would take a year, 2 years worth of work, an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of manpower to go through this data. And do you know what I mean? Like that's the issue that people are facing. Are you seeing the same sort of thing from your end as well in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's why these big data platform that I was mentioning before are becoming more and more popular, is because they're kind of there are a few things that are playing at the same time, um, but essentially it's all about building something that's going to be efficient, but that's going to be aligned with an industry standard. Because if you go back a few years, every kind of database had its own kind of standard, on its own way of storing data.
Right.
But now, related to open source, we're moving more towards what they call open format. So there's still a few formats that you can choose from to store your data, but they're getting more and more similar, and we're kind of seeing a convergence in the industry of how data should be stored and how data should be consumed. And regardless of, the platform that you're trying to use to consume your data, it's still going to be stored the same way, because we kind
Is
of
that AI that's driving that? Because if
no,
it's not. So it's not because
no,
of its
no.
formats that AI can best utilize. It's just naturally moving in that direction anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it can benefit AI, but it's really about being able to consume the data as efficiently as
Right.
possible. And as I was saying, because we've moved away from a closed source kind of operation, and because people start to realize that it's best if, everybody works on the same format, then that's why we see this shift in industry in going all towards the same direction, at least on how the data is stored. And then if you decide to move from one technology to the other to consume your data, to visualize your data, you don't have to do these big migration that you were mentioning before. You're not going to have to spend a year to change how your data is stored. It's still going to be, the same foundation. You're just going to have a different layer on top. So that's kind of the shift that we're seeing. We're also seeing a shift, again, not necessarily related to AI, but in the last few years, there was a big fuss around big data. But you know, big data is kind of subjective. What does it exactly mean, like big data? And a lot of technologies were put together to help process big data. But I think in the near future, people or businesses are going to start to realize that the data that they're dealing with is not so big. And because the computing power came a long way, if we compare it to 5 years ago, they don't need a big data tool to essentially do their data processing. So what it means is, because big data tools always adds a layer of complexity on your system. So I think we're going to see companies to realize that they can do exactly the same thing as they were doing today with simpler technology. They're kind of newer technology because they're taking advantage of more recent programming language or more efficient, computing resources. But they can essentially achieve the same thing as, big data player, while being simpler solution at a lower cost. So I think that's a shift that we're going to see in the industry in the very near future. But coming back to AI, I think I don't know if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, but essentially, for those who are not familiar, essentially when you have like a discovery of a technology, you're going to have a lot of excitement, and people are going to start to talk about it a lot. and then eventually like it's going to boom, and everybody will be talking about it, and then at some point they will start to realize that there are a lot of limitation, there are a lot of constraint related to that new technology, and the hype or the visibility is going to go down by a lot, and then eventually it's going to start to go back again once we really understand what are the limitation and how to actually use it. And I think we've kind of reached the peak of I wouldn't say AI, but LLMs. And I think it's just going to go down from here because people are going to start to realize that there are limitations. There's a lot you can do, but you need to do it properly. And all coming back to the expectation of non-technical people. I think they have expectations that are not aligned with what these tools can actually do. So I think we're going to see like essentially a slowdown of the expectation, only to come back later because we're going to start to understand how to really use these tools properly and where they should be used to benefit from them. And I've seen a couple meme on the internet about about developing software. 5 years ago you gave a job to a developer, it would take him like 8 hours to do the job. Today, it takes him, essentially, he's going to give the job to the LLM, and he's going to spend like an hour coding, and then he's going to spend 7 hours debugging the code from the LLM. And then in 6 months, it's only going to be 16 hours of debugging LLM code.
Yeah.
It's a funny picture, but there's some truth to it.
Yeah.
Because if you're solely relying on LLM to build code and you're not understanding the output and you're not questioning the output, I think you're going to end up in a situation where you have a very large technical debt in the future, and it's going to be really hard to manage. So you still need people to understand what they're doing. And don't get me wrong, like I use LLM on a daily basis to code, but it's because I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm expecting. But I don't want to spend the time of doing like the manual groundwork. I just want the code to be written, and I can do a review. I can understand what's proposed, what works in my specific use case, what doesn't work. I can ask the right question. I can ask the LLM.
It's using the LLM as an assistant as opposed to an actual project leader, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be. I wonder how many how much software right now, as we speak, is being developed with this sort of technical debt that is maybe there are leaders of these companies or whatever that are just completely oblivious to what's happening because of the over reliance perhaps on some of these tools. And it's going to be interesting to see, because in the years that follow, maybe even not in years, maybe in the months that follow, that for some of these projects the realization might suddenly be hit, and it could be incredibly damaging to those companies or to those individuals. I think more specifically when I'm thinking about this, of tech startup founders who maybe are outsourcing the development of something to a third party or whatever that might be using these sort of tools to cut corners and save money. But of course, this could be happening in large enterprise and corporates too, right? These are large machines, a lot of projects on the go, and the oversight isn't necessarily always there, right? As long as there's delivery, things are on time, no one's looking under the hood. So it could be a really interesting scenario in the next few months on that regard.
And I think it all boils down to how exactly you measure the quality of whatever you're developing.
Right.
Because typically I would expect the LLM to perform well into building something that gives you the output that you were expecting in a specific use case. But going beyond that, that's where it's going to get tricky, because it's not because the output is right that your software is built correctly, because as soon as you're going to go outside of that very specific envelope, you might find that it has tons of problem. And going back to flight simulation analogy, something that I was
Raising investment is painful enough without getting bogged down in legal costs. That's why I'm using Founder Catalyst, today's sponsor for Peer, my startup's pre-seed raise. We've been lucky enough to have Sam, the CEO of Founder Catalyst, on the show before. Go and check out that episode. Their funding round service offers the most cost-effective way to produce funding round legals in the UK. It's just £1,495 excluding VAT, with no monthly fees or hidden extras, no matter how much you're raising. One Founder Catalyst customer recently raised 2.7 million and saved around £10,000 compared to the next option. If you're looking for SEIS, EIS Advanced Assurance, they've got a 100% success rate over the last 3 years. Founder Catalyst is built by founders for founders, and from my own experience, I can't recommend them enough. You can scan the QR code on the screen around here somewhere or around there somewhere, I don't know, or use the link in the description for 5% off. Thank you to Founder Catalyst for sponsoring this episode. Now back to it.
Experimenting with some expert pilot that was very interesting and enlightening. Essentially, we're trying to assess the quality of let's say a landing. So I was kind of arguing that just by looking at the aircraft itself, we should be able to assess the work of the pilot, because if it follows a given flight path, then it must mean that the pilot was doing what he was supposed to do. And he said, no, not necessarily. And he gave me a very good example, because if you have, let's say, two pilots, you have your pilot and a co-pilot, and they're flying a fly-by-wire aircraft. So fly-by-wire simply means that there is no mechanical connection between your control and your surfaces. It's some kind of electronic system that kind of drive the surfaces. So he said to me, what could happen is that a pilot's going to take the joystick, put it fully right, and the other pilot takes the other joystick, put it fully left, and essentially like the sum of the two is like having the joystick in the center, and the aircraft is not going to move because they're kind of moving in opposite direction at the same time. So the net effect on the aircraft is just going to remain straight and level. So if you're just looking at the aircraft, everything is fine, but the pilots are doing something completely crazy. So you need to look into what the pilots are doing as well. So I think it's the same thing for software. If you're simply looking at the output, you might find that it's doing its job. But if you start looking at the internals, how it's doing it, then you can find all kind of problems. And when you're going to go outside of the intended scope, then you might face some issue, and that's where you're going to have technical debt. So it might do the job day one because you have like a very specific use case, but as you try to expand your software to do more and more, then you're going to find that the foundation is so brittle that it's going to be super difficult to expand on top of it. And that's where having someone with a lot of technical background to understand how it should be built will be very very beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. Are you finding that in your conversations that you're having with like some of your clients as a consultant, especially in this space, that there are some pretty consistent expectations in regards to data and what can be done with it, that sort of keep coming up at the moment, especially in relation to kind of expectations with how AI can interpret that data?
I haven't seen it so often. I think people are still trying to, at least the client that I've worked with, are still trying to understand how LLM works and how what can they really bring to the table. So I haven't seen any kind of crazy expectation on how LLM can solve problems.
I think from my own conversations, the conversations I'm currently having are more around how AI agents really, and the expectations of them, and what their sort of performative expectations could be within organizations based on organizational data, less so LLMs. I think, again, like you said, that there is this settling period occurring with LLMs to a degree, especially on an organizational level, where that it's understood that there's an augmentation that's happened with the workforce with them. I still don't think that that's been entirely settled in terms of how that works from an operational perspective. I think that's yet to be seen. I'm surprised we haven't seen that, to be honest. Like, in terms of like who owns the data, who owns the LLMs, when can it be used inside, outside of work, working from home. There's a whole thing there which we won't go into, but that's more of an operational and structural thing. But yeah, certainly from the AI agent perspective, that's one that at least some organizations are being quite bullish on, from what I can see, to execute certain tasks on a regular basis, similar to like, you were talking about the bot that you tried to create. there can be a 24-hour employee of some kinds to work on certain things. Are you having many of those conversations, or are the AI agent conversations not really coming up?
No, not in the industry that I've worked with. It's not
Right.
something that has been brought up a lot yet.
That's
But
interesting.
maybe it's just because of who I'm working with, and
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, interesting. So, look, before we kind of approach the last bit of the chat today, I wanted to ask, what are some areas of kind of what you do, which we're kind of touching on already a little bit, which is kind of like the myths, the misunderstandings, and so on. But what are some of the areas of what you do, and specifically as it relates to your startup, that you think are not being sort of discussed or talked about enough in and sort of getting mainstream attention, that you would like to shed light on? Like, it's your opportunity to do that.
I think there are two things, and that's what I'm trying to focus on when I'm building my solution. The first one is really operational, because it's really easy today with the tools that we have at our disposal to build something very quickly, to prototype something very quickly, but it's really difficult to produce something that is production grade. Meaning that when you go in and you're asked by a stakeholder to produce some kind of metrics for a report, because you need to bring some build some kind of report, it's going to be really easy to go in, write some code, do some data transformation, and have that metric available in some kind of sandbox. Being able to take that data transformation from your sandbox and bringing it to a production environment is very difficult, because you have to start thinking about unit testing. You have to start about thinking deployment to multiple environments, ensuring that the solution is consistent between the different environments. You have to start about thinking, working as a team and not only as an individual. So this is really key. And the more complexity you have in your system, the more difficult it is to put into a production grade system. So that's one of the key aspects that my solution is trying to tackle. It's something that is called CI/CD or DevOps, which is essentially a practice in software engineering by which you have some kind of automation from the production of your proof of concept into the deployment in a production environment. And that's what I'm trying to promote. And we see so many companies that are not adopting these best practices, and they're facing a lot of challenges, because they're going to start to realize at some point that the production system is not behaving as they would expect. They have different results from their testing environment, and they don't understand why. Well, that's essentially because they don't adopt these best practices, and they don't deploy their solution as they should. So my solution is really trying to promote that. So that's one of the key area that I'm trying to focus, and I'm trying to promote, because companies need to be aware. And this is especially true for, I would say, startup that are kind of growing. Usually in larger enterprise, they understood that. Well, again, it depends. I think some larger enterprise understood that a while ago, and they put it in practice. And you have some other larger enterprise that know about it, but they don't know how to start or where to start, and they're dealing with a mess of legacy system, and it's really hard to do that kind of migration. But I think it's really critical for startups that are starting to grow in size to be able to implement these kind of best practices. So that's one thing that I'm promoting. And the other one was related to something that I was mentioning earlier about um, adapting your compute power to the size of your data, because I think we've gone too far into doing big data. Everything is big data. Everyone needs like the large cluster and everything, and the complex solution. But like I said, because computing power and the tools have come a long way, even if you compare it to 5 years ago, I think big data is not what it used to be. And, let's be real. I mean, there are very few companies that are Facebook or Netflix that needs to deal with petabytes of data on a daily basis. Like most companies are going to have like a few thousand or a few millions of records or data points on a daily basis, and you don't need to have like the large cluster to be able to process that. What you need, however, is a solution that's going to that's going to allow you to scale. So because that's kind of the challenge is, let's say that you start small and you have like, let's say you build a startup, you have a SaaS, you have some, customer data coming in, and you can get away with a very simple solution. What I think companies are afraid is they're going to build their system because they know that, in a few years, they're going to have a massive amount of data. Even if it's overkill for the current situation, they're going to try to, build something that's going to be best suited for the future. So what I'm trying to promote my solution is that you can essentially launch or deploy your data transformation on a small scale or even locally at your local computer. And whenever the size grows or you need to move onto a different technology, then you don't have to rewrite anything. You just deploy it on a different cluster or on a different technology, and you can still reuse exactly what you had before. It's just a configuration of how much power do you need, and not only how much power. So it's not just about changing the cluster size or the compute size. It's really about selecting the technology that is right for you. So do you need like a very small Python data frame processing to do your thing locally, or do you need like the big guns like Spark and all of that, and to be able to move from one to the other? You have the ability of doing that by just changing a configuration. And not only as a company, but you need to do that exercise piecewise also, because not all your data set are equal in terms of size. So you need to be able to adapt your solution to different kind of problem that you're dealing with. And that's my vision, but I think a lot of people share that vision because you see tools on the market like DuckDB and Polars, and those are essentially data processing capabilities that are built to run locally. Because what you can achieve locally today is probably the equivalent of big data 5 years ago, because the technology has evolved so much and the computing power has evolved so much. So I think people still see big data as this expensive thing, but it's not anymore. I think it's something that, and cost is always something that you need to optimize for and to make sure that you don't overrun. So that's one way of doing it, is to make sure that you use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, building those secure foundations early on essentially is and which I hadn't really considered as well, that now we've got to a point where the hardware solutions that most people own on a day-to-day basis have got to such a stage now where they can handle a lot more than they could have done, say, 5-10 years ago. So that makes a lot of sense. There's one thing that concerns me a lot about the direction we're going, having worked in SaaS predominantly, but tech startups as a whole now for a good 10, 15 odd years, which is this sort of the homogenization, I guess, of software, that there's something about the magic of software that seems to be slipping away a little bit. And I think my concern with kind of our new age that we're entering into, to the earlier part of what you were saying about the accessibility of a lot of these tools, the ability to, say, create an MVP for something very quickly, even with no code tools and things like that, is that my concern with a lot of that is that AI, especially any AI tooling that's going to sort of be used to create these, proof of concepts, these first versions and so on, is always going to be pulling from sort of, okay, well, what has everyone else done? So it's always going to be homogenous. It's always going to be pretty bland and not really have any sort of unique flavor or creativity to it necessarily. And my worry is, as these things go into production, and as people who have maybe learned to code in this fashion too are sort of getting into these projects, that, and you already see it really when you look around, that these products aren't going to start developing much of a life of their own after that. It's going to be function over form, which is fine. That's important. A product has to work first and foremost.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
But there's a bit of magic that I feel like is being lost with some of that. I had a great guest on last season, I think it was, on the show, who talked about how, his main focus in building his platform was creating unexpected moments, like that you'd click something or do something, and it would do something in a way within the software that just exceeded expectations, that just did something in an unexpected but exhilarating way. It created a really nice sense of there's magic here. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but it is something that worries me a little bit, that everything is starting to look the same in the same way that we look at other media. Like every movie looks the same, every game, is starting to look the same. Like it's the same thing that's happening in software, and it worries me a little bit. It's becoming boring.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. There are a few aspects to this. First one is creativity. I think LLM brings some amount of laziness because you don't have to be as creative as before, because if you're, like I was saying earlier, if you're an experienced dev and you need to tackle something new or new technology, you can ask an LLM to kind of do it for you. So you're going to be able to analyze the result and apply some kind of correction if you need to, but you don't have to go through that process of innovating yourself.
Right.
You're just digesting or analyzing something that has been created for you. And I think you're kind of losing that ability of creating something completely new. And something that we're going to see, that I'm expecting to see in the future, is that these LM are really good at coding. Why? Because they've been analyzing essentially Stack Overflow and code base that has been populated for the last 10 to 20 years. So they have this huge amount of data that they can chew and they can learn from. Today, people don't go and post question on the web. They just ask LLM. So the LLM will start like feeding on itself, and they're
Right,
not going to be able to ingest new information. So we're going to kind of be stuck in a closed loop where no new data is kind of up generated, and then I'm really curious to see how it's going to go in the future, because any kind of new, and actually something that I've seen more recently, if you're looking at software that has been developed in the last few months, if you go in these traditional places where people were asking questions like Stack Overflow, there aren't many questions because people don't go there anymore. They just ask LLM directly.
It's actually having an effect on these communities too.
Exactly, and then when you go asking question about these new software, then the LLM have a much harder time to answer your question, because there is no database to use. They have the code base, but they don't have like question and answer that can help to essentially have a good question for you. So I think that's going to be a problem in the future, because you don't have any kind of data to feed from. But yeah, coming back to your original point, I think creating magic is key, and driving the user experience is really critical when you're trying to build something new. And I mean, LLM or AI in general is not really good at this point at creating these moments and these unique experiences. It's good at building what you want to build, but to have that vision and to be able to come up with something really novel is going to be more and more difficult, because people are going to kind of lose that ability of or even that desire to create something entirely new. And like you said, it applies to software, but we see the same kind of trend on social media. If you look at Instagram, for example, going back 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was all about, posting the best picture. If you wanted to get attention, you had to post really impressive pictures. Today, it's all about reels, and they all look the same. It's always the same formula, because the algorithm to get some views and some clicks. So we're kind of averaging everything to be at the same level, because we know what works. But it's kind of a hit on creativity, and on building something completely novel.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the issue with over accessibility and democratization of anything. And then you add the element of, like you said, like an algorithm in the mix too. And it has that capability to destroy everything and make it average. Another good example of that is music, right? If you look at the music industry over the years, there's, I used to be involved with the music industry. There's some really interesting things that happened with that over the period of the last, say, 20 years, where people were able to start making music from their bedroom. The accessibility of music, the way that people treat music. I guess my concern, and why I'm making that comparison to music, is that it's ultimately what ended up happening within music is the way that it affects the consumer. The consumer expectations also got lowered along with the actual product itself. And so you end up then with a absolutely horrifically fixed loop, because now it's no longer just a loop that's happening within the industry itself. It's now an expectation for it to be bland and to be a certain way. And if it isn't, it's weird. It's too different. And that's when something dies, in my view. That's when it's gone. Because if you look at the mainstream music industry now, and it has been for a very long time, it's been dead for a very, very long time. Like, there's nothing new and exciting coming out of mainstream music, right? It's all happening on the outside. It's all happening. It will always happen. Thankfully, you'll always have these fringe indie sort of things going on, these underground movements. But that's just human nature. We want to create, but it's just horrific that happens on large scale for these sort of industries. And I'm worried that it's going to happen to the software industry in various capacities, because obviously it means a lot of livelihoods destroyed, or it just makes it a less appealing or viable career, which means people who are otherwise very talented and can offer something amazing to the world are not encouraged to take that as a path. And that would be such a horrible shame, that we wouldn't get some amazing new innovation happen, because they're just like, well, I can earn more money studying, I don't know, whatever, right? Hairdressing or something. It would just, that would be a real shame, if it killed off creativity in this space.
Yeah, I think music is a very good analogy. I don't know if I'm skewed. I don't know if I'm getting old or what, but like, if I was born in the 80s, but if I look, in the music industry in the 70s, like, the amount of exploration that was occurring was crazy. Like, if you look at, some bands like Pink Floyd, their first album, like, it was so unusual and so innovative. Again, I don't see these kind of experimentation these days. Maybe it's just because I'm not paying attention. Maybe it's out there.
Not in the mainstream. Absolutely not in the mainstream. You do hear it, you do see this stuff, but it's not. You would have to really struggle to find it, but it's there.
And yeah, I think that's the key. It's because before, music was kind of more difficult to access. Like, if you wanted to listen something specific, you had to buy records. So, like, I think the gap between mainstream and exploration was kind of small, because yes, you had like radio where records were played, but if you wanted to explore yourself, then you had to go into a shop and actually buy like a physical record. These days, because you're kind of getting fed by live stream music, by YouTube, it's really hard to go the extra step and explore something that's outside of mainstream, because like mainstream is kind of pushed on you instead of you trying to feed from mainstream. So I think that's probably the key difference. There's probably still exploration, but to access it is so much more difficult than it used to be, that we pay less attention to it.
And it's never been easier to be a creator in that space too. Like you can literally sit on your phone and make a song. Like it's incredible.
Mm.
And people
And
have.
and like you said, I think mainstream is getting more and more average, like more similar than it used to be. Because if you go back, like mainstream used to have a lot of different genres, but today most of the music are kind of essentially converging towards the same thing.
Right.
So yeah, you might be right. It might be something that we see in the in software, and we might see these
Yeah, and that would
this
be
trend going beyond the industry.
Yeah, and it would be horrible to see because of the relationship between consumer and music. To keep on that example for just a second is one that psychologically I think is of the view that the music is a very disposable piece of art. It's a very disposable art form. There's very I don't remember the last time I even bought an album or bought any music. I don't buy any music. So even from that sort of commercial aspect, I don't have the same attachment to music as I used to. And I think most people are in the same position where they just see it as like almost a human right to have access to all the new music, and not have to pay for it. And there's no relationship between the individual and the artist anymore. I think that the same thing is in danger of happening, is already happening with software. The proliferation of apps and the way that we engage with them on our smart devices, whether that's a TV or whatever, that there is this detachment now where there just isn't a value assigned or an appreciation assigned to any of these things. And as they become more and more average, why would you? Right? If there's nothing wowing you, if there's nothing sort of making you feel like something magical is happening, why would you? I watched a YouTube documentary recently on the Imagineers in Disney. It was really interesting documentary. It was a tech review type thing. They went in and had a tour and explored all the different technology they're working on. And it was really interesting because I had just watched a ton of YouTube videos exploring all the new robotics companies and the startups that are really, wanting to release their home robots, their commercially available robots, and ones for factories and all that. And they all looked pretty much the same. These sort of robots for home and for whatever, no personality, just a robot. Like if you went into ChatGPT and said like show me a robot, it would be that. It was like a robot. Okay, cool, humanoid robot, fine. But then you go into something like this documentary with the Imagineers in Disney, and their focus isn't on creating necessarily the most functional or the most efficient. It's on creating the robots with the most personality and with the most sort of to create a sense of awe and excitement and things like that in the person watching. It's performance. It's to the point where they're training these robots in virtual reality to learn different moves. So if they almost fall over, that they catch themselves in a cartoon way, like they're animating them. That's the magic that's gone from technology, in my view. Nothing better encapsulated it than that documentary. These guys are working on cool stuff because it makes us feel like kids, makes us excited for the future. And I feel like the technology ecosystem at large could learn a lot from that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think I'm trying to understand why this might be happening. Is I think it's because creator still exists, people that are very innovative, but I think they're being drawn into that sea of people that are creating just for the sake of making money.
Right.
Because these days it's so easy to use all these tools to create something very efficiently that's going to be useful to some extent, but it's going to lack that that passion and that creativity. And even if you create something that's going to be kind of novel, there's so many options to choose from that it's going to be hard for you to differentiate yourself. And a good example of that is when Apple started to introduce the apps on the iPhone. There were a few builders that were trying to explore and try to do a few things, and one comes to mind was called iBeer. I don't know if you remember that, but it was essentially just your screen would be filled with some kind of beer, and you would have the sound of the beer filling your display. And it was using the internals of the iPhone, such that when you would tip your phone, it was essentially like you were, swallowing the beer, and it was making the same sound. So it was really simple. It was just like filling a beer, drinking a beer, that's it, with the sound. And the guy made a ton of money because it was fun. Like, people, it was something that was never seen before. People were, not used to leverage all the, technical advance of the phone at that time. So it's kind of the first one to do that. And people were excited because it's kind of a party trick that you pull out your iPhone and you drink a beer from your iPhone. Like, if someone would come up with some kind of similar idea today, there would be so many options and so many other software that would be so hard to distinguish himself that would just go unnoticed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. I think real creator are being buried in the noise of all the automated creation, and it's kind of a shame.
And it's also maybe largely down to expectations of people. Like, now that we know that's possible, it's just not as impressive. People are harder and harder to impress. Like, look at movies. They can have the biggest, most bombastic action and explosions and monsters and dinosaurs and special effects. You can spend 300 million, 400, 450 million on a production, big blockbuster movie, and then it just flops. They're like, we've seen it before. It doesn't matter. That's the relationship now that we have with this stuff. So I don't know, man. Maybe we need to go back to the analog age for people to get excited again. It's like whip out a VHS tape and a piece of vinyl, and people go, "Ooh, wow!"
Yeah, I think they would be.
yeah, maybe that's what it takes. Well, listen, man, we've come to the end. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and exploring all these topics with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. So, all that's left to do is let you get on with your day. I've taken up more than enough of your time. Thank you very much. I'll put your LinkedIn in the description, of course, the website for your company as well, so people can go check you out. Is there anything else you wanted to shout out before I let you go?
Same for me. It was a pleasure to be here. I think you have a great show, and I hope people will enjoy it. If you have any data problem or any need for consultancy, just drop me a line. It will be a pleasure to help you out. But again, thanks for hosting me. I think the conversation was really interesting. It went in a direction that I was not expecting, but
I'm good at that.
It was even more fun than I was hoping for. So
good. I'm glad to hear it. Well, yeah, thank you again, man. Really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll catch up again very soon. Good. Best of luck with everything.
Same to you. Have a nice day, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe, or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.